3 steps to BIM compliance. The agenda for today: when BIM goes wrong, which is to highlight the purpose of having a BIM compliance workflow, and then the ultimate BIM requirements checklist to help us define those requirements that we need, and how to achieve glorious BIM. So talking about when BIM goes wrong and why we need compliance. So what is compliance? Since we have many BIM standards from around the world, and with that we are able to define rules and standards to follow. As long as everyone is following those rules, we are complying. And so there are a lot of rules and regulations in place, as with any industry, be it the financial industry or even sport. Everyone should be following the rules, and the referees help us achieve that, because without those rules, things would be pretty chaotic. So we should have like a BIM referee. And what might happen if we don't follow those rules? So sometimes these sort of things can happen. Some of the largest bankruptcies at those particular times. So there was some malpractice and bad practices that were going on here, and that all caused a lot of new rules and regulations to be put in place. But how does this relate to BIM? Well, in BIM, we have quantities and estimates and money involved as well. So having a fully coordinated model to take estimates from is quite an important BIM use, and extremely important to get right. So if we're given a model and there are some open or in progress items, and maybe it's not complete yet, and if we want to see it complete, you can see there are a lot more items in there. If you have a model that is incomplete, you will be having lower estimates, and then you'll end up with a budget that may be lower than the actual amount needed for construction. And that causes a significantly bad impact. The other part of that is being able to measure. And not all measurements are taken the same way. So rules of measurement, very important on agreeing on the rules of measurement. For instance, the window, inside of opening or outside of opening. And that is why it is important to follow these rules and standards. So great, we've got a scope and a few rules. So that would mean success, right? But what happens between start and finally success? As you can see, Jennifer goes through a lot between her first day at school and finally graduation. And we know it's not a straight line. And from a school and education perspective, how do we monitor and control that? Report cards. Every year we get the report cards, but we also get progress reports in between. So we know what our children are excelling in and what needs to work, what we need to discuss, and what can carry on as usual if all is going well. So how does this relate to BIM? We look at projects as they progress over time, and in a perfect world, projects would progress gradually, and at each stage, milestones would be achieved. But we know in reality, work begins, some people mess around, there's a bit of panic at a certain stage, then a lot of work is done while crying just before the deadline. And then we end up with all these deliverables from all the teams, and we want to report on all the thousands of clashes that we have from sometimes one person, and if we're lucky, a team. And there's this bottleneck of all that information, and that's if you get all those models before the deadline. And sometimes it's a train smash. The project derails, your coordination is off, the estimates are off because we didn't meet those expectations. So what is the ultimate BIM requirements checklist? There's a lot of requirements, and these are just some of the categories of BIM requirements, whether it be for elements, geometry, reliability, accuracy, purpose, information standards, etc. And all the questions that are related to them: too many, too few, gaps, overlap, is it symbolic, is it generic, etc. So the first thing you do that will set the tone for the rest of these checklists is to define the purpose. So if we can define the purpose for what we are going to be using the model for, this will lead to defining what is required and when it is required. And then how about creating a scope with a list that is defining what should be modeled rather than leaving that for chance? So making sure you don't get too much information or too little information. and being able to define the geometry that you are looking for. Is it 2D representations? Is it just a symbol? Is it generic models? Should it be detailed somewhat? Or are we looking for fabrication level of detail for the geometry? And being able to define that for each of those milestones is very, very powerful. And then defining the reliability is very important. So is it just for preliminary use, or is it going to be coordinated, or is it as built? And then the accuracy. All of those questions need to be answered and defined so that we can have a clear understanding of what the BIM use is. So teams usually have checklists that they have been using for years, like things that they need to review at certain milestones, or certain elements that they need, like here the point of connections before we install any fixtures for coordination. Sometimes you might need to provide documentation, be it a Revit family or a PDF spec document. It could be calculations or standards. We also want to include best practices or notes and any instructions that we would need for specific requirements. Make it easy to access and easy to understand, and we will actually get what we are looking for rather than getting messy deliverables in the end. And then define what information requirements. When you've got multiple parties involved and there's changes of information at a certain point in time, what is required? Is it a quantity that the estimator needs? Being able to find that standards you're looking, or the standards that you're following, is it an IFC parameter that is needed? We recommend that you have everything all in one place. So capturing all that information in one cell over here, we are able to have a lot of data and visually have it represented in a very condensed way. So everything from geometry, information, documentation, notes, attachments, links, checklists, and responsibilities in one place per cell of information. So how do you achieve glorious BIM? Well, we need to understand that all it takes is just one bad model to derail us, as it will have a significant impact in spoiling all the other models. A model with missing geometry or an uncoordinated model can really mess things up when we're doing clash detection, for instance. So how do we eliminate those bad apples? What can we do? So we talked about having it all in one place. So being able to have that scope and verify that scope and gathering the requirements and the models in the same place is really very powerful. Simple model validation, so being able to easily link what requirements and what elements should be tied together, and going through that process very easily will help us save so much of time, but also help us not miss out on those checklists as well. Having the right tool set as well will also assist in verifying and measuring, as well as taking sections, highlighting elements, having the ability to extract and sort elements to review by group or category outside of the building, so as to not have to navigate inside the building and look at the elements that need verifying, for example, especially if there are many types of a certain element. And then being able to check information and understand what the requirements were in the same location. For example, these were the materials needed, these were the checklists, and so let's check those. And being able to filter tasks that are ready and verify them, and they fly out, as you can see, and then we start seeing them color-coded, and we see the percentage of work that has been verified. And as newer versions of the model are added, new elements need to be verified as well. We do not want to waste our time with poor quality models. So making sure that workflow of compliance, making it clear, having detailed and having checklists, and validate and verify our models against that before we publish those models is very, very important. And once we publish a model, you can see it and it will be available for download. So we have a work in progress status, a shared status, and a published status. So in conclusion, so we talked about BIM compliance, but it's also making sure the team is aware of the consequences of poor BIM. Know that there are many important aspects to consider. The final requirements must be simple, must be clear. We should make progress updates be an integral part of our workflow. We should stop wasting hours and killing team morale using unfit BIM. And always verify BIM before you use it. Here are some resources to help your BIM team grow. Follow this link to get more information on Planly. Join us for our next webinar, which is episode 9, how to reduce BIM coordination issues by 53%.